What's up, friend? Welcome back to Seed and Sparrow Homestead. Today we're going to hang out on the floor of my living room. This was the best spot I could find that was big enough and clear. We're going to talk about the 2024 garden season, kind of like what my process is for planning that, how I decide what I want to grow, how much of it I want to grow, where I plant it, you know, all of the things about that. Now, I will say I have an established garden. I'm not like designing this space. I'm just deciding where I'm putting things in the already established garden. So if this is maybe your first year gardening or you're still trying to figure out your garden layout, I do have a video I posted last year that I will link, try to put it here on the screen and down in the description, and that goes into way more detail about laying out a garden and setting up a garden for the first time. So let's first talk where I'm located. I'm in South Central Pennsylvania. This is now Zone 6B, was 6A, which doesn't really mean a whole lot. Don't pay attention to your growing zone. I see so many people ask, like, what zone are you in? Even if we're in the same zone, our growing seasons could be weeks apart, which can make things vastly different when you're planning the garden. What you need to pay attention to is your first and last frost date. So with growing zones, that is just your average lowest temp in the winter. So that more applies to things like perennials. If you go to a greenhouse or if you go to like Lowe's or Home Depot, purchase a perennial, if you look on the tag, it'll say like hardiness zone 5 through 9. That just means if you're in a zone lower than 5, that specific plant most likely won't survive your winter. So that's really what you need to pay attention to when it comes to zones. Otherwise, we're just going to focus on our growing season. So the amount of time we have between our last frost date in the spring and the first frost in the fall. So for me, my last frost in the spring is typically the first week of May. It does vary. It's based on an average. So this year for me, it's May 4th, and then my first frost in the fall this year is October 12th. It's usually somewhere around that second week of October. So I have roughly 160 days of growing time. So if that is right around where your last and first frost dates are, we have the same amount of growing time, and then you can better grow along with me. Don't so much focus on, hey, I'm 6B2. Doesn't really matter too much unless I'm talking about some perennials. So if you are unsure of what your growing season is, when your frost dates are, I will put a link down in the description where you can find that all out. All you have to do is like put in your zip code and it'll bring up your frost dates. Okay, so my number one tip that I want to start with, if you're planning your garden and you're still somewhat new to it and it seems overwhelming, what I like to do is write a list of what my family actually eats, produce-wise. And then I will narrow that down by making sure that I can actually grow those items in my climate. And then beyond that, I will number them, you know, like level of importance by how much of them we consume. And then the ones at the top of the list just get priority on the amount of space that I have to work with. So for me, my family eats a ton of potatoes. We love potatoes. I use them multiple times a week. They store really easily for me, and they're a very easy crop to grow, at least in my area. So I devote a lot of space in my garden to potatoes. That makes sense for me. I'm not going to devote as much space this coming year to tomatoes. You know, things change, diets change, health changes, and I'm finding I don't tolerate some of the nightshades the greatest, mainly just tomatoes and peppers. We still consume some of them, the rest of my family does, but I don't need to grow quite as much. So this year I'm dialing back my tomato production. And then in terms of figuring out how much I need, I have so many people ask me, Kelsey, how many do I need to grow to feed my family? That's a loaded question. That's a really hard question to answer because there's a lot of variables that go into it. How does your family eat? Do you eat? Are you just growing this garden for fresh eating, or do you plan on preserving things or putting things into cold storage? And in how many different ways do you want to preserve things? Like if you consume a lot of tomato products and you want to put a good dent into preserving them on your own rather than sourcing them from the store, well, do you want to preserve for sauces and salsas and ketchup and paste and diced tomatoes and soups? Like, there's a whole lot that you can do. And tomatoes cook away to pretty much nothing. So you need to plant a lot of tomato plants if you have a lot of different ways that you plan on preserving them. Just for an example, last year I grew 28 tomato plants. I did some slicers and some paste tomatoes. And from that I got 450 pounds of tomatoes. And for our family, that was enough for my tomato needs. I did sauce, I did salsa, I did soups, I did ketchup, and then I freeze dried a whole bunch for paste and sauces as well. Now, last year was a really good year for my tomato crop, but the weather comes into play. If you have an overly dry or an overly wet year, it might affect your yield. If you have pest pressure, that's going to affect your yield. So I could say, just guessing, if you gave me all of the factors, this is how much you need to plant. There's always that chance that it might not be enough because of the factors we can't control. So I don't even know if that was helpful, but I then just look at this amount of space I have in my garden, and I look at my list of things that I know I want to grow and have a general idea of all the things I want to do with those plants. And then I will just divide accordingly the amount of space that I have. So if we eat a lot of potatoes, well, then the majority of my garden space is going to potatoes. If we don't eat a ton of tomatoes this next year, then I'm going to do less space for those. We want to grow a whole bunch of carrots, so I'm going to devote more space to carrots than I will to beets. So, it really does come with experience. You will figure it out. I promise you that. You do have to be flexible as a gardener and go with the flow, because there's a lot you can't control. That's just gardening. Some years you have really good years, other years you don't. But the cool thing is you always have the next year, and you can apply everything you learned from that previous year to the next year, and more you will have success and figure things out and get an understanding of how much you need to grow, the best places to plant it, and so on and so forth. Now, I will say this, because it did play a role in my planning out the garden this year. And that is, I think there is potential for 2024 to be a bit of a bumpy road. There's a lot of factors that go into that. One of those factors is that it's an election year, and we all know how the last one went and what went down. But there's a lot of things going on in the world, and sign of the times. I don't make decisions off of fear. I don't operate in fear. I do believe in wisdom and doing what I can, what's within my control, within my means, to be as prepared as possible for whatever life throws at me. And hey, totally hope I'm wrong. Nothing goes on. And worst case scenario, I grow a whole bunch of food and I have more for my family and more to share. So, that's all I'm really talking about. I'm just wanting to use the space that I have in the most productive way possible. I am choosing varieties that I know grow really well for me here, that produce high yields, and also thinking about how to streamline the process a bit more, take some stress off myself. I'm really focusing on root veggies this year, so my carrots, parsnips, beets, turnips, potatoes, sweet potatoes. They are super easy to just harvest and store, put them into cold storage. Now I'm gonna have to figure out a bit of where that cold storage is gonna be. We have some ideas, but I just wanna be really intentional about what I'm growing this year for that purpose. That's all. Don't read into it too much. I don't wanna, like I said, I don't wanna invoke fear. I just wanna operate in wisdom, and I felt like I had to be wise with what I'm planting this year. So let me just take you through what I have decided to grow this year. I am focusing heavily on root crops, like I said, so I want to do a bunch of space devoted to those. I'm gonna do lots of carrots. I do have heavier soil here. If you're a PA native, you know we've got some heavy clay soil. I've been working to make that better each year, but it's still a work in progress. So I wanted to choose varieties I know will do at least better in heavier soil. So I've got some Chansonnet Red Core, some Corral, and some Danvers. I am going to dedicate a bed to parsnips this year. Parsnips are a bit harder to grow than carrots, at least in my experience. I've had a hard time getting them to germinate. I'm thinking I might try germinating them inside, like doing the fridge method with like a damp paper towel in a plastic bag, and then once they've germinated, go ahead and plant them outside. They also take a really long time to get to maturity, so I'm gonna give it another go this year, hopefully doing it sooner and also helping with the germination may give me some success. So we're gonna do parsnips. I have a variety of beets here. Now, you can store your seeds for a long time, honestly. It's just each year you store them and you're not using the seeds, your germination rate is going to decline. So I have a whole bunch in my seed collection I just need to work through. That's why I have a bigger variety for beets. These have all grown well for me, so I'm fine with growing a whole bunch of different ones. I've got some Chioggia, some dark red Detroit. These are golden beets from Baker Creek, some Ruby Queen, and some Cylindra. My other root crops, I don't have any more seeds, but my potatoes, I saved 40 pounds of potatoes to use as seed this year. That's what I planted last year, and I think that's the amount I'm gonna stick with. That usually gives me enough for us to last us until the next harvest. I've gotten anywhere from, this last year I got 262 pounds, the year before that I got over 200, and the year before that I got more like 300. So it just depends on the year, but 40 pounds seems to be enough for seed potatoes. I'll also be starting some sweet potato slips. I'll probably do 30 to 40 sweet potato slips as well. I haven't had much success with sweet potatoes, but this year I'm trying it in grow bags, and I'm gonna see how it goes. If it doesn't go well again this year, I might give it a rest for a little while and just purchase them locally, but I'm not ready to give up just yet. One thing I'm not growing any of this year is broccoli, cauliflower, or Brussels sprouts. I have a really hard time growing them because my cool season in the spring is really short. It gets hot here quickly, and by the time fall comes around for fall gardening, I am totally beat. I just don't have it in me, the bandwidth to do a fall garden. Now that might change this year, and I'm always hopeful that it'll happen, but I'm not depending on that. So I'm not even gonna try. We don't need a whole lot of them, so I can just source them locally. That's fine. I am going to grow cabbage. I have 3 varieties here. We love sauerkraut. I like freeze drying it for soups. And I love to make like halupkis or halishki here. So I definitely want to have cabbage in the garden. So I have some Savoy, what is this one? Copenhagen market cabbage, and some early Jersey Wakefield. Something I'm gonna do with these cabbages this year is I'm gonna get them out earlier. They're gonna go out before my last frost date this spring, and I'm also going to be covering them immediately. I made that mistake last year, and then the cabbage moths got to them, and then I had some worm issues, which I took care of, but I want to try and avoid that this year. So I'm gonna try and be proactive as much as I can with all of my plants. I haven't said, and if you're new here, I'm an organic gardener, so I'm not using any sort of pesticides, chemicals, or sprays in my garden. I try to keep it as natural as possible, meaning completely hands-off and just trying to be as preventative as possible. I am gonna grow a whole bunch of celery this year. This grew really well for me last year. I'm just gonna do a big patch of it this year. I love celery because, yeah, you can just harvest like the whole bunch of it, but I even, just chopped it at the base and I had it keep growing. You could also just harvest stalks, the outer stalks, and just let the center keep growing, but it's kind of a cut and come again thing. You don't just get one harvest from each plant you can continually harvest. So that's really nice. We eat a lot of celery here, especially over the winter months, in soups and stews, casseroles. So I plan on freeze drying a whole bunch of this. I am going to grow some zucchini this year. I'm just dialing it back. Last year I think I had 4 plants. I'm just going to do 2. This year, zucchini is prolific most of the time unless you get hit with bugs. And I really want to keep growing it for mock pineapple. I like to freeze dry it for soups over the winter, but I also like it in stir fries and kebabs over the summer. So I definitely still want it in my garden. I just need to dial it back a bit. I'm just growing this one variety this year, some Italian striped. For bush beans, I have the same 4 that I grew last year: Dragon Tongue, Strike, Royal Burgundy, and some yellow wax. I like growing the variety of them just because they're really pretty all together. I freeze dry these so they maintain their color. If you were to cook them, they'd all turn green. I'm not totally sure how many I'm growing this year. I grew, I think, 20 plants last year, and I was just swimming in them. They are heavy producers, but I want them in my pantry, so I have to just figure out exactly how many I'm going to grow, but I'm probably just going to be doing a whole bunch of freeze drying and maybe some pressure canning. We'll see. Forgot to put these with the other root veggies, but I'm going to try turnips this year. This is like one of the only things I think that I'm actually kind of experimenting with. I've never tried them before. I've heard they're great roasted, also good in place of mashed potatoes, mashed turnip. So I'm just going to designate a small little space in my garden to growing these and see how we like them. If we like them, then I'll make a bigger plot for them next year. But I've just got some, I think you say it, chagouin, maybe? And I think these are purple top. Cucumbers. Really the only purpose I have for cucumbers is for pickles. I am going to grow 1 muncher this year. My kids do like some cucumbers to snack on every once in a while, but my main purpose is just for pickles. You don't, as long as they grow well, you don't need a whole lot of cucumber plants. These guys are so prolific. From 2 plants last year that even didn't really have the greatest year. They did get some disease at the end there. I got 24 pints of pickles. We had some for fresh eating, and I gave a ton away, and that was just from 2 plants. So I'll probably do 1 plant each of these. I'm going to dedicate some space this year to okra. We love okra. I honestly forgot about it last year, and then it was too late to plant, but we love fried okra. I'll make some up and keep it in the freezer. I'll also freeze dry some of these for soup. Spinach. I'm going to do some American spinach. I have not had much success with spinach over the last few years. Gotten really small harvests because we just have a really short spring season. It gets hot super fast. Spinach hates the heat. So I think this year I'm going to do some winter sowing in some milk jugs. And I also have a shadier location underneath a trellis that I'm hoping will allow this to keep growing and extend its growing season a bit when the heat hits. So we love spinach. I love freezing it, freeze drying it, using it in soup, stews, smoothies, and also for salads. I like it also in pasta. So I really want to be able to put a good dent into the spinach that we eat this year. We've got 2 types of kale, some lacinato dinosaur and blue curled scotch. I love them both. We eat a whole lot of kale as well. The last few years, kale grows really well for me. I've been able to put up everything that we need. We eat it in a lot of soups and stews over the winter and sometimes in smoothies. So these 2 are my go-tos for kale varieties. Lettuce, I think I'm going to do the same thing as the spinach. I'm going to try and winter sow them in some jugs before my last frost date to see if I can get a bigger harvest out of them. We don't eat a ton of lettuce. I'm going to just grow this for loose leaf cut and come again lettuce. I'm not growing these for the actual heads. I'm just going to take the outer leaves from them and allow the plant to keep growing. But we do like it occasionally for a salad or like on top of a burger. I've got a whole bunch of peas here, some sweet gem, some Lincoln, some golden sweet pea, some spring blush, and a sugar snap. So I'm really upping my pea growing game this year. This is a crop kind of like dry beans. If you were to grow like black beans, pinto beans, anything like that, you need to grow a whole lot to even make a dent in what you consume. I did 50 plus pea plants last year, and I got 2 big gallon bags in my freezer of peas, shelled peas. If you're growing peas to eat like the entire thing, then you might not need to grow as much, but if you want to shell them, you need a whole lot to actually have it accumulate to anything. So I'm thinking I'm going to at least double what I grew last year and do at least 100 plants, if not 150. So I'll be growing a lot of peas this year. We love those. I'll either freeze dry them or put them in the freezer. Leeks, onions, and shallots. I'm not going to grow quite as many onions this year. I'm going to grow more shallots. I prefer their flavor, a bit more mild and sweeter than an onion. I'm going to grow more leeks this year. We love leeks. So dialing it back on the onions and upping the leeks and the shallots. So I have multiples here of some of these. 2 different shallots, Zebrune and Red of Florence. I love both of these. I wanted to do these pickling onions. This one is new, but I'd like to pickle and can some onions. Then I've got 3 different types of onions that grow well here and all do well in storage. Well, this one isn't so great in storage, but I'll freeze dry these. Walla Walla, some Cipollini, and Southport White Globe. Both of these do really well in storage. Then for my leek variety, I chose Caratan this year. It's supposed to be great for its size and its hardiness, its resilience to cold and to pests. All right, just squash, peppers, and tomatoes left. My squash, so I'm thinking, if you've been following along, I'll show you on my diagram, I'm gonna turn what my Ruth Stout potato bed was into mainly a squash bed, and then I have another area I'm probably gonna do some squash. I have a lot here and I need to narrow it down. I definitely want to do more of my candy roaster. They're like my favorite pie pumpkin. So I definitely want to grow those. I know I want to do some honey nut, which is like a butternut squash. Some, I think, sweet dumpling, and some delicata. I love just roasted squash in the oven. I could eat it every day. I'm debating if I want to sacrifice any space for just decorative pumpkins. I have some here. Now, I mean, you can eat them too, but they're not our favorite to eat, so I'm undecided there, but I'm thinking I might do some of the Long Island cheese pumpkins as well. But I've got things like Cinderella pumpkins here, some Blue Hubbard, some white luxury. I might grow them, I might not. I think as the season progresses, like I don't have to start these until like April, so I've got some time to decide, but the ones that I showed you are definite. No, we're gonna be growing those. Peppers. Some things I really want to focus on this year. I love my Ajvarski peppers. I love them roasted. I love canning the Italian roasted red peppers, so we'll definitely be doing some Ajvarski. This is from Baker Creek. For medicinal purposes, which we'll get into at some point, but this is in my pepper group, not my medicinal plants. We're gonna do cayenne. And then I'm not growing any regular jalapenos this year. I'm just doing nadapinos. They are jalapenos without the heat, same flavor. These are from Baker Creek. And then I am gonna try maybe 1 to 2 plants of each of these, some shishito and some pepperoncini. But I'm not gonna grow a ton of peppers this year, just a few plants. And then the last thing I've got here is tomatoes. Pretty much all of my tomatoes I'm focusing on this year are just paste tomatoes. For some health reasons, I'm not consuming tomatoes right now. My husband isn't a huge fan of them fresh, so I'm not doing many slicers, if any. I'm hopeful that by the time, you know, I'm able to harvest these, that maybe I can eat some here and there in moderation, but I'm not counting on that. So I've just got some Amish paste, sorry, they don't have names on the back, Alpolka, San Marzano, and of course they're not in focus, sorry about that. San Marzano, Alpolka, Amish paste, and then I've got some Floridade, those are more Alpolka, yeah. I guess I'm growing Alpolka, San Marzano, and Amish paste this year for my paste tomatoes. They're all really heavy producers, grow really well for me here. I'm pretty sure these are all indeterminate. So the San Marzano is kind of a semi-determinate, so they're not going to continually produce, but the Amish and the Alpolka will. I only have one cherry tomato this year. I'm going to do Sun Gold Select from Baker Creek. These are really yummy, and if we do want any for salads, then I'll have some. I also like to make the cherry tomato corn salsa, so we could use those for that. I am only going to do 3 slicer tomatoes this year, which kind of hurts my heart, but I'm not eating them, so this will just be for giving away to family. I can put them in sauce as well, so I mean, they're gonna get used. But in case my husband wants some tomatoes on like a burger, salad, something or other, you know, I'll have something besides a paste tomato. So I've got this one, which was a favorite of ours last year, Wapsipinicon. And then I've got the Dr. Witchies. And this one is new, Sart Relois tomato. We are fans of, Grant's singing over here. We are fans of the yellow tomatoes, the less acidic, a bit sweeter. So I'm not actually gonna grow any red tomatoes this year besides the paste. Okay, my friend, it's been a couple of days. I had other things come up and now I'm just getting back to finishing this video. But what I kind of want to wrap up with, I'm going to show you my garden plan, but in showing you that, I want you to know there's no real rhyme or reason behind what I'm doing. I don't really follow rules in the garden. I don't pay attention to companion planting guidelines or what you should and should not put together. I don't really do a whole lot of crop rotation. The only time I rotate a crop, if you want to call it that, is if I dealt with some pest pressure or disease. Then it's just common sense to me, well, maybe I shouldn't put that crop in the same place. I'm going to move it as far away from that last place as I can. Something else I do take into consideration is, you know, the height of a plant. I want to make sure that where I'm planting something, you know, the way the sun hits it, as that plant grows, it's not going to shade out whatever is around it. So I do keep height in mind. But I mean, other than that, what I focus on is the quality of my soil. I want to make sure that it is nutrient dense, really rich soil. I'm working on building that up every year, making it more loamy. I think healthy soil is living soil. If you see lots of life in your soil, lots of critters and worms, you know you're doing something right. I focus on adding organic matter to it every year, lots of organic compost. I do wood chips and leaf mulch. Any other like plant matter that I can find that's not diseased throughout the garden season just gets thrown back into the soil. So I am always working on building up the quality of my soil. Then I know that as long as I give the plant we're talking about the appropriate amount of sunlight and its water needs, and I make sure not to overcrowd things that may need the same nutrients. So if we're putting peppers and tomatoes together because they're in the same family, they require a lot of the same nutrients, I want to make sure not to overcrowd them. So that way, as long as the soil has what it needs, their other needs are being met, there's no competition then. So I don't worry about planting those things together as long as they each have enough of what they need. Now, if I'm planting a lot of a crop, like let's just say carrots, I do try to plant carrots in a bunch of different beds. So that way, if there is any disease or pest pressure that comes along, hopefully the fact that they're separated will provide an advantage and maybe one or two beds won't be affected. So I do try to keep that in mind as well. But overall, I'm focusing on my soil and I am devoting the majority of my bed space to the crops that we eat the most of. So all of this to say, I'm a bit of a rebel in the garden. I don't follow rules and I really don't overcomplicate the process. I'm just gonna quickly give you an overview here. Things are subject to change because I'm indecisive at times. So this here is the garden right next to our house, all the way towards the front of the yard. So this section here is like 25 by 25, and I already have established some raspberries and some strawberry beds in here. This space I redid a little bit. I widened the pathway from last year. I put in these 2 raised oval beds, and I did an arched cattle panel trellis. So this space this year is mainly going to be dedicated to medicinal herbs and some leafy greens. So I'm thinking I'm going to do container gardening for all of my medicinal herbs, and they're just going to be in throughout here. I'm also ordering in some currants and some gooseberries that are going to go into these 2 raised beds. And then I'll probably put some spinach, lettuces and stuff in ground as well in between everything. I have my garlic planted in here already. So that's kind of the plan here. For these 2 arch trellises where the squash failed this last year, I'm going to do peas here because they should handle that shade a bit better. And here where I had my Ruth Stout bed for potatoes, I think I'm going to do squash. And I'm going to plant them up higher here so all of the vines can go back this way, and I'm hopeful that that will work and there'll be enough sunlight there for them. I was debating to do a row of potatoes. I don't know if that's going to happen. We're just gonna play it by ear. Now over here, like here's our house, our deck, and then we just put in this like tiered wall here. I have a green stalk, this L-shaped bed, and this rectangular bed. I'm debating making this into kind of like a kitchen garden and also like an educational experimental space. I know a lot of you don't have a whole lot of room to work with, and this is a pretty small area. I was thinking of putting like a whole bunch of different crops in here and just seeing how they all do, and seeing how much yield I can get out of this space. So this is just gonna kind of be for fun. So in this no dig portion and then all of my raised beds around here, I've got some established perennials, some strawberries, 2 of those beds, a bed of raspberries, 2 beds of asparagus, and this little patch of rhubarb here. I'm devoting 1, 2, 3, 4 beds right now to potatoes, and I'll do a second planting of them to get the amount that I need, probably right in those same beds. Something different this year, I'm taking down all of the trellising that I had for tomatoes. Tomatoes are not going to be here anymore. I found that everything in front of them in the beds just got too shaded. And I think just the orientation of the sun, like some of the tomatoes just didn't do that great, so they're getting moved. I am going to put in 2 in-ground flower beds on the outer edge here of these raised beds here and here. And then down here I have probably like 200 to 300 bulbs planted, a variety of them. And then that'll be beautiful in the spring, and then after that I'll do some annual flowers once they're done. I have 2 beds for carrots and a bed up here for parsnips. And then in the in-ground portion, I'm doing a whole row of cabbage, a few onions, and then a few peppers, okra and green beans, flowers, and then I think I'm going to do 4 or 5 determinate paste tomatoes in this little section here. We'll see how they do. A whole thing of shallots, a whole bed of leeks, some more flowers, and then a whole patch of celery, and then down here will be beets and turnips. My trellises right now, this is a climbing rose and then a climbing rose up here. And here is a hardy kiwi plant that's taking forever to establish, so I might do something here with this one. Off to the side down here, I'm gonna keep the trellis that is already here, and I'm gonna do some cucumbers and then some additional peas here. In this kind of open wood chip area, I do want to find some sort of seating thing. I said that last year and I never got around to it. I have these two small square boxes here. I'm going to put more strawberries in because I have a bajillion strawberry runners. I'm going to give some away, but I'd like to use some as well. And then this was the already established cottage keyhole garden. And when we expanded this garden, we expanded out, and then this kind of left like this awkward space. So I just like kind of extended it because I wasn't about to move this whole thing. That would have been a huge undertaking. So in this awkward space, I'm just going to put some grow bags for sweet potatoes, and I have some more over here in front of the greenhouse. In this cottage garden space, this is just gonna kind of be for my enjoyment, just for fun. I bought some more rose bushes, surprise, surprise. So I'm gonna have like 8 rose bushes in here, my apple tree, there are some strawberries and a whole bunch of other perennial flowers. I might throw some medicinal herbs in here too that perennialize. So this is just gonna be a fun, like pretty English style cottage garden. I'm doing some delphinium and a whole bunch of foxgloves, some Canterbury bells, chamomile, just making it really lovely. At the very top, I have this space in front of the garage. It's going to be more squash and then just a whole bunch of sunflowers lining the garage. And then here's where the tomatoes were last year. We're just going to extend this all the way to the end of the garage. So I should be able to fit like 16 tomato plants up here, and then down in the no dig portion I'll have 4 to 5 more. So that should be enough for my tomato needs. So there's a little peek inside my brain and my very unstructured planning process. I'm not sure if that was helpful at all, but this is what has really worked well for me, so I'm just sticking to it. But if you do have any questions as to why I do something the way that I do, or if you need some help with something you're trying to figure out in your garden, go ahead and drop it down in the comments. I'll be happy to help you out. I'm super excited for this 2024 growing season. I hope you all are excited to come along with me. It is funny how just a few months back I was totally over the garden. I was done. Wanted to rip it all out and to move on to slower times, and then give me a month or two and I'm ready to go again. I can't wait to start some seeds, get my hands back in the dirt, start harvesting, and I'm excited to bring you all along for it. You guys all have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time.